Welcome to Cultimatum, the podcast that delves deep into the culture of complexities of cults and human trafficking. I'm your host, Anonymous Andrew. Each week, we explore different facets of cult life and human trafficking, from the psychological manipulation to the brave stories of those who have escaped.
Hello, everyone. I'm Melody. I'm Andrew's co-host. Having experienced the depth of a cult firsthand, specifically the House of Yahweh, I'm here as an advocate for fellow survivors. My journey has inspired me to help others who find themselves in similar situations. This podcast is committed to respecting our guests' privacy. To ensure their comfort and safety, we offer them the option to remain anonymous.
Additionally, we would like to include a disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed by our hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Cultimatum or its affiliates. Cultimatum is not responsible and does not verify for accuracy any of the information shared by our hosts and guests. The content discussed on this podcast is based on personal experiences, opinions, and speculation, and should not be construed as professional services or advice. Neither the host nor the guest are assuming liability for any misuse or reliance on the information presented. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and listeners are encouraged to conduct their own research and seek professional advice where appropriate.
Before we dive into today's episode, we want to issue a trigger warning. Some episodes may explore explicit and potentially disturbing topics such as sexual abuse, rape, human trafficking, suicide, and other sensitive subjects. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Cultimatum, the culture of cults and human trafficking. And my name is Anonymous Andrew, and with me is my co-host Melody. Hi, Melody.
Hello, Andrew. We have got another cult that we have not heard of yet. And
Yay.
Yes, exactly.
Yay.
It is called The Move or The Move of God. It was started in 1960 by Sam Fife. Our guest is Richard Kiers. Welcome to the show, and he is going to tell us more about this. Richard's also an author. I want to throw that in there, and he will talk more about his book toward the end. But Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So where do you want to start? Is this a cult that you were born into? How did you get involved with this?
I was 10 years old when my parents, we were actually in a church called the Dutch Reformed or Christian Reformed Church in Canada. And when I was 10 years old, my dad specifically went down to South Carolina to a meeting down there with a group of people where they met Sam Fife and some of his followers. And when my parents or dad returned from there, we suddenly dropped out of our church, and a couple of other families joined us, and we started our own little gathering at our house. Actually, it went from, I think, maybe 4 or 5 families up to 8 or 10 families over a period of a year. That's how we got into it.
And this was all in Canada?
In Ontario, Canada, yes.
Okay.
So this organization or this movement started in a house with 4 to 8 families?
Well, actually, the movement itself started in Florida, I believe a place called Hollywood, Florida, by Sam Fife. And he had already been building his church down there for some time before our family became involved. He originally was a pastor, a Baptist pastor, and he was, I believe, asked to leave the Baptist church because his beliefs were too off the wall for them.
For the Baptists.
So he decided to start his own church. And he was kind of a failed country music singer. He was also a pastor, and he was quite charismatic, and he was able to get this organization going down there, and then it started to grow. I think our group in Ontario was one of the first Canadian affiliates of the group at that time.
Okay, so let me. I'm hearing this, and I think I know the answer to this, but today we're in the internet age where you can hear about anything anywhere on any internet site or social media. But I would imagine back at 10 years old, there was no internet, and there was. So how did you hear about this pastor?
I really have no idea how my dad
Okay.
discovered this. Like I said, I was 10 years old, and I just have no idea. Many years after I had left, I spoke to some of my dad's friends that were friends of his at that time, and they told me that he was really searching. He was really lost in the church that he was in. He didn't feel that it was morally up to the standards that he thought Christianity should be, and so he was searching for something. How he found it, I really don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, I just find that interesting because today it's easy. You just Google something and you'll
Absolutely.
find something. And I'm going to keep saying it every episode. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to join a cult. So you're thinking you're joining a church, you're joining an organization. But I'm just wondering, back then, did this gentleman mail out flyers to the world? Did he have billboards? I'm just curious how your dad, but if you don't know, that's okay. So did you move out of the family home, and did a church get built? How did it expand?
After we joined, it became very independent. We started pulling away from the school we were in. We started our own school. We started having all of
Wow.
our services were in our house actually and then eventually Sam came up with this idea that everyone had to move into the wilderness, as he called it. We had to move on to commune farms. The farm that we ended up moving to was in northern Canada, northern British Columbia. It ended up with, I don't know exactly how many people, but there were many families that joined that moved in there, and we basically became completely secluded from the world, and we were no longer permitted or allowed to really associate with anyone that we had previously known, including relatives. We were told that our family outside of the move was no longer really our family. They were all sinners, and
Very
they were
common.
going to hell anyways. So we had a new
Oh,
family now, and so we became totally disconnected from absolutely everyone and anything in the world.
was there that? I'm starting to think that there's some Illuminati somewhere in the world that got together at some point in history, and because it's the same story of cult after cult. You
Well,
can't. You're going to hell if you're not part of us. It's like
well,
all these people got together and said, "We're going to make these rules, but you can go off and form your own organization, but you must follow A, B, and C because we're hearing the same thing."
oh yeah.
I was
That you're going to go to hell.
very interested listening to your story, Melanie, because the for example, the 144,000 people that are going to be ruling and reigning with Christ at
Oh,
the end of the day,
yep,
and I mean
yep.
that's
You
all
heard
similar. That's all stuff that we're
Yeah.
taught. We're going to
similar
sit at the right
teachings.
hand of God. We're going to rule the world.
Yep.
It's all very similar stuff, and it's at the same time as well. They really control everything about you. They could, like, you think North Korea is tough. I mean, your hair has to be a certain way. Your clothes has to be a certain way. Girls' dresses have to be a certain length. Boys aren't allowed to have facial hair. One of the reasons I have a goatee is because my dad hated facial hair because it was, again, you were going straight to hell, and I grew that when I was very young,
To be a
and I
rebel.
kept it.
You're a
Uh,
rebel. Yeah.
because
I just
because
I
you
just wanted
can.
to be that, you know.
Because you
Absolutely.
can, right.
Yes.
Absolutely. So the similarities are unbelievable, and I'm doing some research on another book that I'm going to be releasing very soon, and I've been interviewing a lot of people, and I'm just in awe with the similarities of each
Right.
one of these, but yet they're all different,
Oh, they're
different cults,
different.
but they're very similar.
They do
Oh,
take it's all. I'll say it again. It's like a Chinese menu. They pick two from column A, two from column B.
Exactly.
You know, it's like,
Yeah.
or they adopt whatever they feel will work for them. So tell me about this commune. I guess you had to buy property and start building churches and residents. How'd that work?
Well, my dad and a group of guys went up to northern BC and they found a farm and they purchased it. My dad sold his property in Ontario and took that money, purchased the farm in British Columbia. And then there was, I think, 5 or 6 families that moved up there together. When we moved there, there wasn't even a road into the property. We had about I think about 14. We were 14 kilometers, if you understand what kilometers are. You're in America,
Yeah.
right? So
Yes.
14 kilometers off of the main highway, about 7 kilometers or so that we had to build of road, which we pretty much built by hand with shovels and pickaxes. Then we built log cabins. We lived in these little log cabins, and we had one communal building for every meal. It was what we called the tabernacle, which was our place where we would go have our meals and our services and our everything, but was there. But we lived in our own individual cabins, but there were no kitchens. It was just bedrooms and a small little living room to sit
How
and
old were
visit
you when
with
you
your
were helping
family.
with all of this?
I was 12. In
Wow.
fact, I turned 12 years old on the road traveling there.
Okay.
Wow.
All right. Couple of questions. You build log cabins. You build a road. You buy this property. Did you have electricity and running water and heat? Because northern British Columbia, I can only imagine that you
Cold.
probably have what two months of summer and the rest is winter. I'm guessing. I don't know.
We actually we actually have about 5 or 6 months of decent weather here, and then 6 months of winter.
All right, but it's got to be pretty cold the rest of the year.
It is very cold, but we had no running water. Obviously, we had a spring that was in the back of the property where we would haul water from every day to each cabin, and we had no electricity and only outhouses for toilets, and it was really back to the woods. No television, no radio, no communication whatsoever with the outside world. Other than we did have a radio in our house, but we were only permitted to listen to it, I think, 4 or 5 times a day for 10 minutes or so, because the only communication with the farms up there was the local radio station in town. You could go there and ask them to send a message to the farm, and then the farm would either come out and pick you up, or like if you were going to visit them or whatever, you'd say, and the radio station would say, to so and so, here's the message.
Yeah.
And
wow,
that was our only communication with the outside world.
Like a communal public radio kind of a PA system, but just broadcasted.
No, it was an actual radio station in town.
Right.
And we had our little radio in our house, and we could listen to this message time and get a message and respond.
Were you totally self-sufficient? How did you guys manage to get enough food to feed all of you? Were you growing your own gardens? Were you canning?
Thank you.
Were you slaughtering animals? How were you surviving?
We were obviously not totally self-sufficient the first year because we didn't have the farm set up. But once we had the farm set up, we had our own cattle, our own pigs, our own sheep. We had huge gardens. We grew a lot of vegetables and fruits, and we had storage facilities to be able to store, cold storage to be able to store fruits and vegetables, not so much fruit. But
right.
It was. We lived on turnips and carrots and potatoes, and
wow.
I know that they would go to town and pick up things like sugar and salt. And that was kind of the staples.
Okay. Now I remember my question. Where did money come from? Were you working? Did jobs?
Well, when I was there, there was some wealth that came with the people that moved there.
Oh, okay.
Because like my dad sold his farm in Ontario for a substantial amount, and he invested all of that. And yes, there were some people that had some money, but there was several families that had no money, but they lived there just as equally as the rest of us. And eventually, the farms, after I left, which we should get into a little bit later, but after I left, the farms actually established a couple of businesses, like a logging company and a trucking company. And
interesting.
And they did that because they realized that they couldn't sustain themselves without an income.
You've heard of the Amish, I would imagine. It sounds a little bit Amish to me.
It had similarities for sure, yes.
Okay.
Let's put it this way. If you were in a shopping center, go ahead. I can answer this in a minute.
Oh, I just had a question. How were you communicating with Sam Fife if he was the leader and he was kind of telling you guys what to do? And how were you guys getting communication from him?
There was a group. There was a hierarchy in this group that you'd had the Sam Fife and Buddy Cobb basically were the leaders, and then there was a group of traveling ministry which they called the traveling ministry, which traveled from farm to farm and from community to community and would teach
Okay.
the gospel of
Okay.
what was going on. So there was a constant flow of information coming through specific people that were under Sam's wing, kind of.
Okay.
But
You're
so
getting...
to follow up with Melody's question, did anybody ever actually talk to Sam Fife, or did he ever come visit you? Or
Yes, he periodically came up, and and many times there was several times per year that they had big conventions where a lot of people would travel to like Dallas, Texas, or Miami, or Canton, Ohio, places like that for big, huge conventions where Sam would come and spend hours preaching, and other preachers would get up and preach as well.
were you allowed to have cars?
There were cars, but they were kind of community owned.
Okay.
So they were cars that came in when people moved there, but once you moved there, then everything you owned became part of the community.
Okay.
Okay. Let's get into the meat and potatoes. You wrote a book called The Swindled by Faith. At what point? So right now I'm hearing communal. It almost sounds nice, except that I couldn't do it, but you're all on this nice plot of land and you're all growing your own food. And what point does the cult factor come into it? And do you want to segue that into the book that you wrote?
Sure. Well, the cult factor comes in immediately, actually, because it was a control. It was a total control situation where everyone did as they were told. You basically submitted completely to whatever the ideology was that was taught, and you lived according to those rules. Our lives were completely dictated to us. We were. It started with clothing and dressing, and the dating world. You had to be approved by the elders to be allowed to date someone, and then it had to be for a certain amount of days, and if you passed the test, then you were allowed to marry them. If you didn't pass the test, you weren't allowed to marry them. Boys and girls couldn't play together. We couldn't swim together. We couldn't skate together because obviously that would make the girls pregnant.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
you
that
laugh
evil
about that,
swimming.
but I swear,
Yeah.
when I was 14 years old, all I knew was that girls could get pregnant if you held hands.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Well,
and
that's what they taught you. Yeah.
exactly, and we were not allowed to even talk about it. It was a taboo subject. So, and then, with me, what happened was there was a lot of abuse, and it wasn't so much me.
Oh.
It wasn't so much me, but there was a lot of kids that were really, really, really physically abused, and there were a lot of kids that were, there was sexual abuse on different people in different farms. And the honest truth is, I've spoken to many people since then that have told me stories that I had no idea happened. And I knew there was bad things happening, but I didn't know what had happened. And I've interviewed probably, I think, 8 people that were on these farms, on the farms of the move. That one of them got pregnant. She was forced to marry the guy that she ended up getting pregnant with. They ended up leaving together when they were about 18 years old, and they never stayed together. They ended up divorced, and it was just really, those kinds of things were really tough. And there's other churches that do that too, not so much just cults. There's other religions, there's even other ideologies, and for example, there's even cultures that do that. So it's not so much that that's part of
Right.
a
Right.
cult,
Yeah.
but in this particular cult, that was the rules. And when I decided that I had enough was, well, it wasn't even that I had enough. When I really lost my belief, I really was invested in this. I really felt that it was the right thing, and I was so excited about it. But when I was 12 and we moved up there, my dad became very, very ill, and we were living in camper trailers, and one of the senior, what they called elders, was living in the camper trailer with my brother and I and another gentleman. And my dad became very sick, and you could hear him crying and just wailing in pain in the other trailer. And this went on for days and days. And this older gentleman came into the trailer with us one day and said, "It looks like your dad's going to die. You better prepare yourself that he's going to die, because this is a test of God testing him for his faith, and it doesn't look like he's got enough faith to pull through." And they absolutely refused to take my dad to a hospital or
I was just going
to
to
a
ask
doctor.
you that. Yeah.
And my dad ended up pulling through, but
Wow.
things were never the same for me after that. I just didn't believe that if there was a God that was supposed to be this all-encompassing, loving God, that he would allow that kind of pain and that he would allow that kind of suffering. And it wasn't that my dad suffered. I was not even the youngest. I had younger brothers and sisters that suffered through this as well with the same story. Your dad's probably not going to make it because he doesn't have enough faith in God. Those little things. I was 12 years old. I had a beautiful little tractor that I played with and I loved it. And this same older gentleman, one day, he just picked it up, made me take a shovel, bury it in the trees out in the back, and told me, now you're a man. You're no longer a child. And those little things, you're not allowed to play with toys as kids. You're not allowed to be a kid. That affects you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, you miss your childhood.
Absolutely. We had no childhood. Maybe some of the later kids that were, 2, 3, 4 years in had a childhood because all of the hard work was done because the cabins were built and the barns were built and the houses, it was there was an infrastructure in place already. But when we moved there was nothing. So we got up in the morning, we worked all day, and there were days that we'd go to bed so tired. Like I remember going to bed so tired that I cried myself to sleep. And it didn't matter. You still had to get up the next morning and do it all over again and all over again and all over again. You don't get paid anything for this. It's you're donating everything that you give.
Contribution of communal contribution of labor.
Absolutely. And then the food, generally speaking, the food was absolutely terrible. You had whole wheat bread that was made out of whole wheat. Literally, you could anchor a boat with a loaf of bread.
Yeah.
And our porridge was made of whole wheat porridge. And you didn't have sugar on the table. You didn't have salt on the table. You didn't have peanut butter and honey. All those necessities. Your bread, you were lucky. You could have butter on it because we had our own butter. But that was it. There was no jam, no peanut butter, no honey, no nothing. It was just butter. A lot of people say that I complained a lot. Well, I did because it wasn't right. I didn't like it. And
I don't blame you. Oh, God.
You wanted a little flavor.
Yeah, exactly.
I go nuts when I love almond butter, and I
oh yeah,
yeah. And the other night I went into my cabinet and it's gone. I'm like, oh, I didn't put it on my shopping list, and I'm like, for 3 days I have to suffer because I don't have almond butter. I can't imagine what eating this food that you just like the porridge. When you mentioned that, I was like, I know how porridge can be good if you make it right and put the right ingredients in it, but plain porridge, oh God, no.
And no sugar.
No sugar, no.
No sugar. So and then you talk even to go more beyond that. The move was how the hierarchy worked. There was a group of elders that were on the farm that the lay people rather, answered to. And those elders made the rules. Those elders were basically, I think, told by Sam and his group what the rules had to be, and then they would make sure that the rules were followed. If you disobeyed the rules, you were called into an elders meeting and you were raked over the coals and given punishments. And I, for example, when I was about 14 years old, there was a girl there that naturally you start liking people, and I liked this girl a lot. And they had found out that I liked this girl and that she liked me, and we had been talking quite a bit and everything. And well, they decided that this was not going to happen. And the father of this girl had me called into an elders meeting, and he said to me that God spoke to him and told him that I was a homosexual.
Oh, Jesus.
And back then, even in this world that we live in, being a homosexual was bad. But in the move, that was a one-way ticket to hell. He insisted that I was gay because he had gone into the barn and he had caught me masturbating the bull. And I knew nothing of it. To this day, I have no idea what he was talking about. But they believed him, and they decided that I had to be, I had to be cured of that, and the demon had to be taken out of me. And afterwards, a couple of years later, one of the elders who was no longer in the group, in the move, he actually came to me and apologized for that. He said, you were 14 years old, someone should have stood up and defended you. And he said, I feel bad that I didn't. But realistically, even my father was an elder, and he sat there and looked, and he just said, oh my God, is this true? But he didn't believe me,
Wow.
How do you make the leap? So you're and we just talked about this in another interview. So you're exactly right. At 14, the hormones start kicking in, puberty's there, and boys and girls at that age will start looking at each other, and they begin to attract each other? And how do they make the leap? So they catch you two talking. You probably snuck off somewhere and we're talking, but they wanted to put a stop to that. So they make a leap that you're a young teenager falling in love with this young lady, but you're a homosexual. How do they make that leap?
It's kind of about control, I think. If they can
Yeah.
make you feel, if they can make you feel humiliated and they can make you feel worthless, they have you. They've got total control of you, right?
I'm asking rhetorical questions of a cult that doesn't make sense to begin with. So I realize that. You can either tell us when you left and when you wrote the book, or I want to hear about the book.
Well, I decided to leave when I was 15.
Wow.
And I told my parents that I was leaving, and I told my mother the night before, and she just laughed at me and told me that they would change my diaper and send me home. And my dad, I told him, and he just said, within a few months, you're going to be an alcoholic, you're going to be a drug addict, and
there we go.
And that's it. You know, you're doomed. You're going straight to hell. And so,
Yep.
So if my mom had not laughed at me, I think I probably wouldn't have had the courage to leave. But I ended up packing a shoebox that night with a pair of jeans and a jacket. And it was about minus 32 degrees in Canada that night.
Oh God.
And I walked 3.5 miles to the highway and hitchhiked into town and basically came to Edmonton. And there's more to the story than that, but that's how I got out of there. And I never went back, and I just would not go back at that point. And but then I started writing this book in about 1996, believe it or not. But I refused to even tell anyone that I was writing the book until my parents had passed away, because I knew that if I would publish this book, it was going to hurt my parents. And my parents, they were brainwashed, even though they were responsible for how they, what they did with their children and where they took us and all that kind of stuff. I believe they were completely brainwashed, and they believed that they were doing absolutely right. And
Right.
to the day that my dad died, he thought that he was still, the chosen one.
So this is a hard question to ask. How did you find out that they passed away? Did you ever go back to visit, or were you in touch with them?
Yes. About 6 years before my mom passed away, mom and dad were living on one of the communes, and they just pushed my mom and dad off. They had a community outside of town, a trailer park that they were moving older people that had no more use and no more money, just getting them off the farms. And that's where they moved my parents to. So at that time, my mom and dad were able to have a telephone. So we started communicating a little bit more.
Oh, good.
And for the last 4 years that my mom was alive, I actually really developed a good relationship with my mother. And yes, she was still religious, but she never spoke about religion with me. She knew that it was an off topic.
Yeah.
But we had, to the point where we pretty well every Saturday night had at least an hour conversation on the phone. So I got close to my mother. My dad and I never saw eye to eye. He was always very judgmental and very critical of everyone. And it just, I could never get close to someone that always had bad things to say about everybody. So we just never clicked.
Sounds like my boss at work, but I digress.
Yeah.
So your parents pass, and what gave you the inspiration to write the book?
Well, I decided to finish the book, and because I thought that people should hear the story. I met with a bunch of people over the years that had been in the group, and listened to the stories of their lives and how they were so messed up. And I saw a few that I knew that committed suicide when they were older because they just couldn't deal with what had happened to them when they were younger. And also, I just felt it was important to tell the story. So I told the story, and I did publish the book. And but I again got a really big boost when I published the book, because a friend of mine posted just a small little transcript out of my book, just a piece on her website, Facebook. And People Magazine got a hold of it, and they phoned me and they said, "Would you like to come to New York? And we're doing a documentary. Would you like to be involved in it?" I said, "Absolutely." So they flew me to New York, and we did a live interview there. We did a bit of a documentary. That's when I really became motivated to get this thing pushed through. And we published and did very well. Again, like any book, they do well for the first little while. Unless you keep pushing it, it slows down. But I have another book, like I said, that's coming out fairly soon. And that's a much bigger book with a lot more details. And it's not an autobiography anymore. It's more cult. It's research that I've done over the last 5 years on all sorts of different cults. And I've interviewed hundreds of people. And it's really interesting. So I'll get that one out to you guys too once it's done.
Yeah, and maybe we'd have you back. I would love to hear because, as I said in the beginning, Melody is much more versed in cults than I am because she's been being an advocate for many, many years, almost 20 years. But I'm pretty new to this, but I would love to hear about. So you interview not just the cult that you were in, but you interview cult members across the board.
Right across the board, everybody. That's,
okay, great.
Yeah, everybody that's been in a cult that wants to talk to me can talk to me. I have not posted anything on a podcast. I do now have some of these people have come back to me and said they'd really like to tell their story on a podcast. So I'm working on setting one up that I can that's going to come out with my book, my second book.
Oh, good.
And I think that would be a good idea. There's Well, I would appreciate that. I think that's amazing. I had one just a couple of days ago that messaged me, and this is the thing that really surprises me is how many people are out there.
Yep.
That feel so alone. Like they feel like they're the only ones. And there are so many. There's like 10,000 active cults in the United States as we speak right now.
Oh my God.
And this cult, you say you haven't heard of it, but yet the move, when I left, there was 44,000 people in the move.
Are you kidding?
It was not a small group. They were all over the place. They were in the United States. They're in Europe. They're in Alaska. They're in Canada. They're in South America. They're in all these countries. And now they're much smaller because a lot of the younger people have left. But there's still over 4,000 people involved in this.
That was going to be one of my questions. This cult is still alive and well.
It's alive. I'm not sure it's well. They are selling off assets, and I think they're fizzling out. But so Sam Fife is dead. He had a epiphany from God that he was going to live forever and he was never going to die. And he was in a convention. I was actually there in Canton, Ohio, when he got up in front of 10,000 people and said, "I'm not going to die, and if I do, that's proof that I'm a false prophet." And within a few years, I think 1975 or 1976 or something like that, he crashed his plane and killed himself in Guatemala. And I asked my dad right at that time, actually, my brother asked my dad, my older brother asked him, I was there when he asked, he said, "So does this mean he's a false prophet?" And my dad just said right away, "Oh, no. He had achieved such a level of perfection that God had to take him from this earth because he no longer fit here."
That's called gaslighting.
Yeah.
That's just totally gaslighting.
Oh,
Absolutely.
You just changed the narrative. That documentary you mentioned, what is the name of that documentary? Because I would be interested in looking that up, and I'm guessing some people in our audience would be too.
It's on Discovery ID.
Okay.
And it's called, that's a good question. What is it called? It's People Magazine Investigates Cults.
Oh, okay. I actually have watched that. I probably watched it. I just need a refresher.
Yeah, they have several episodes, and one of the episodes is on our cult that we were involved in.
And you're in this documentary.
I am. They tell some of my story. In fact, they actually hired actors and acted it out.
Yeah.
They missed the point on a couple of things. They kind of took some liberties, but at the same time, it tells the story, and I was definitely a big part of that. So it was interesting. It was really, really emotional. It was my first actual interview that I did on this subject. Now I've done hundreds, so I'm a lot more comfortable talking about it.
Wow.
Well, like Melody said, I think you should definitely interview Melody when you get your podcast up and running. Of course, our podcast, we'd love to come on and talk about. I think we're a small podcast. We just we're a startup, right? And I have another podcast, but I'm putting a lot of time and labor into this one because I wholeheartedly believe in bringing the awareness. I just don't think America and Canada and wherever have any clues that like you said, there's 10,000 cults in America. This is 2024. I can understand back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Of course, there were a lot back in the 60s and 70s. Jonestown and all the other ones, the doomsday cults. But just the fact that I'm not going to ever judge anybody because I'm an alcoholic in recovery and I have my own demons. But I just don't understand how people join an organization. I understand they're looking for a higher power or guidance or a belonging to something. And I know they love bomb you at the beginning, but 3 months in, 6 months in, when they start beating your kid or your daughter is raped or something, why you just don't get up and leave? And people don't. Apparently,
it's because at that point in time you've become totally dependent on them, and you become so dependent emotionally and attached that you and that you cannot, for the life of you, imagine that it could be better anywhere else. Because you've been totally convinced that it's terrible everywhere.
Right. Yeah. And they tell you if you leave, you will die of cancer or you go to hell. Or
I interviewed a lady. It's interesting because most of the people I interview were kids when they were in this, and now they're in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. I interviewed a lady a few weeks ago, and she was telling me that they had been told her and her husband were going to leave, and about a week before them, another couple left, and they got into a car accident, and all of them were killed in the car.
Oh God!
And they told her and her husband that if they left, the same thing was going to happen to them, and it took them 4 years longer before they had the courage to leave, because they were terrified that God was going to kill them if they left. And I have to be honest with you. You need to get a copy of my book and read it. And the reason why is this: you'll find out stuff that's very interesting that I can't tell you in an hour-long story. But you feel like you're going to hell. That's the point. They teach you that you will go to hell. And then they teach you that hell is this absolutely terrible, terrible place. And when I left, I literally made a choice that I would rather go to hell than stay where I was.
Right.
And when I accepted the fact that I was willing to go to hell for eternity and burn rather than stay, then it was easy to leave.
Yep.
But I knew that I was doomed. And you understand that, Melanie.
Oh, sure. I do. I absolutely. Actually, Andrew, on the interview I think I did for Andrew's other podcast, I said the same thing. I'd come to the conclusion that basically, if this is their version of heaven, I feel like I'm already in hell, and I'm willing to go to hell because I can't live like this. I just didn't matter anymore. I was so conflicted that I had to get out. It didn't matter.
I have a question. I was brought up a Roman Catholic and from birth, and was dragged to Sunday mass and Sundays and Catholic school. I was an altar boy and a choir boy. You know, my parents were very, very religious Roman Catholics. I don't think the Roman Catholic Church falls into the cult category, but they are on the border, but they don't punish you the way that some of these other cults do. But some of their preachings are similar. We were just talking about this in a previous interview. Like if you masturbate, you get hair on your palms, and they talked about hell all the time. The pastor or the priest would get up and do a sermon and talk about hell. So I feared hell when I was young. So it does the putting the fear and hell into somebody, especially in our society when we talk when hell is heaven's up here and hell is down here, and Hollywood does a great job at characterizing what hell looks like. I watched an episode on Netflix the other day of The Sandman, and they went to hell. It's just how Hollywood depicts it. It's horrible, and so so I can understand why. So these people who wanted to leave, but a friend of theirs were killed in a car accident. They were probably told they went to hell. You know, they died in the car accident. Absolutely. Yeah, they went to hell.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay, Richard. Let's begin to wrap up. Anything that maybe we glanced over or you would like to emphasize?
I think the one of the things that I've had repeated to me over and over and over again by people is the fact that they sunk into a depression where they saw no way out anymore. And if I recall back, if I go back to my childhood when I actually tried to commit suicide and
Boy.
I failed. And it was when I failed that I realized that I didn't want to die. I wanted to live. I wanted to have a life, and I had to leave. So I ended up leaving. I had a woman ask me a few days ago. She's in one of these chat rooms that we're in on Facebook, and she said, "How do I leave? I'm in one right now, and I can't get out." She says, "I'm terrified." She says, "I don't want to give up on Jesus, and I don't want to give up on my church, and it's a part of my community. It's a part of my life." But she said, "I know it's a cult." It's like tearing a bandage off, and you have to literally go through the pain of leaving before you can feel the relief of being gone. And it took me about 4.5 minutes to realize that I did the right thing when I left, because it was ice cold outside. I crossed the river and I was walking up the hill on the other side of these cabins. And I turned around and stopped and looked, and I could see the smoke coming out of the cabins. And it looked like a Christmas album. Like, it was just absolutely beautiful. There was this Christmas scene early in the morning, white snow everywhere, smoke coming out of the cabins. But nobody could see what was going on inside.
Inside, right. I was just going to say,
Right.
what? Yeah.
Yeah, it was a total
Crazy.
facade. And I looked at it and I just immediately, it was like I had 1,000,000 tons lifted off my back. And I literally floated up that hill until I got to the top of the hill. And I just was, I experienced something that I had never experienced in my life. I took control of my own life, and I was no longer going to be pushed down and told I was no good and told I had to do this and had to do that. And it was terrible. It was not a good place at all.
And you said the magic word, because every single interview, again, we hear similar stories. And you mentioned that you tried to commit suicide. The lady that we interviewed just before you had tried to commit suicide. It seems like you're right. There's a depression that comes along with this because you're stuck there. You don't know how to get out. You're watching all this abuse going on. You have no free will. You don't have free thinking. And I'm going to say it, Melody. I just don't understand why law enforcement and our government can't look into what's going on here, because they're going after.
I mean,
I'm going to go off on a rant, and I really shouldn't.
Well, it really has to do with exactly what our previous guest stated, is that they actually have to prove that they've broken laws. And I mean, because people are there supposedly of their own free will. Obviously, children that are there don't have any choice. Yeah, I mean, I was brought into my cult when I was a teenager too. I didn't have any choice. My parents joined. I had to join. But it's that idea that you have to have something to prove. You have to prove that a law has been broken in order to have any kind of legal action against them. And that's usually hard because people are taught to be silent. You're conditioned to not tell.
But take, let's say, organized crime, or take a drug dealer that, or like a cartel or whatever that they know is doing wrong, but they can't prove it. They get search warrants or surveillance warrants or something so they can go in and get that proof. So they should take a cult, pick any cult, and get a search warrant. And I know that they could probably find grounds, because there are people like Richard and all the 26 previous guests we interviewed that could give them what is it called? Circumstantial evidence to get a search warrant.
Yes, but let me break in here for a second. If you remember David Koresh.
Yes.
In his organization, they interviewed children for 4 years before that incident happened. And they interviewed children and they interviewed people that left, and they didn't believe a single one of them that they were telling the truth. They just kept saying, "Oh, you're just angry, or you're just this, or you're just that." When I left, about a year after I left, another gentleman or young fellow left, and we collaborated together. We went to the local journal, Edmonton Journal here in Edmonton, and we asked them, we told them our story. We told them it was a great article for them to research and do some writing on, and the journalists need to get involved. And we felt journalism was the right way to get through it, get the media involved. And they ended up setting up an interview. They went up there. They drove up there with a group of them from the newspaper and interviewed them, but they gave them 24 hours notice before they came up.
Of
So
course.
when they arrived at that farm, they got the total, complete, perfect
Opposite.
version of the perfect utopia that a person could live in. And these people, everybody they talked to was happy. Everybody they talked to was just, oh, the people were dancing in the streets. It was great. And when they came back, they wrote an article about how wonderful this lifestyle was on this commune that they found. It was, oh my God, it was unbelievable. And we're sitting there, are you kidding me? Like, so that was the kind of help. So you give up. You give up after a while. The government does not care. It's too small a potato for them to worry about.
10,000 cults. Listen, I get the David Koresh thing, but that was 30 something years ago.
Yeah.
Now today in 2024, and cults are all over the internet. There's websites and social media, not all of them. Some of them probably fly under the radar, but like the Luz de Mundo is, you're laughing because you've heard of them.
I have.
But they have caught that leader, and he's doing prison time. So if I was to go interview a child from the Luz de Mundo that got abused, I would think I would believe them now. You said they didn't believe them back then. Today, I would hope that they would believe the child or the.
One of the leaders from the move was actually charged with abuse, child
Yes.
abuse, and physical abuse, and he ended up being given jail time. But they appealed it and they won.
Of course.
And so people like me, not so much me because I'm pretty vocal and I'm pretty angry about it. And I the more and more I interview people, the angrier I get, and the more I'm determined that this has to be exposed. But there are so many people that I talk to that are just terrified. And unfortunately, they've been out of these groups for sometimes 20, 30 years, and they're still scared of going to hell if they open up their mouth and tell the story. And so I just tell them, well, you're going to hell anyways because you left. So just tell me the story.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So
you might as well go all in.
And when you talk to someone who went through this 30 and 40 years ago and they cannot tell you the whole story because they break down and cry and literally melt crying when they're trying to tell you their story, you know that this impact was unbelievably terrible for them when they were a kid.
I can only hope with ID Discovery, Netflix, A&E, HBO, Amazon, all of these networks are now going out and doing these documentaries on these cults. It's becoming now like you can't turn on any streaming device without running into a cult documentary. So let's hope this is the beginning of the end. I know it could take 20, 30 years, 40 years, but you're talking, the move is already in its demise. And I think there was a couple of other cults that Melody and I interviewed that they're defunct now. So let's hope that it's the beginning of the end. It's going to take time. But
there is a lady I'd like to connect you guys with because I think you should get her on as well.
Great.
She can tell you some stories about in California where this cult she was in for years and years and years. The whole group of them worked and they would go to the farms there and be harvesting, and they were migrant workers and everything. And they turned over 100% of their pay to the leader. And every check went to the leader, and they got $5 a week to live off of, and they worked their butts off for years and years and years and years, and all because they were scared. They had to do what they were told, or they were going to hell.
Yeah.
And they were abused physically, they were abused emotionally, they were taken advantage of financially. And this guy actually ended up went to jail because of tax evasion.
Send her our way, please.
Yeah, sure. He went to jail because of tax evasion and refusing to pay his staff. So yeah, you need to talk to her. I'll send her your way. She would love to talk to you guys too.
Richard, you need to come back when you start your podcast and when the other book. Go ahead, Melody.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say in closing, what is the message or theme that you would like to end on? A message to anybody in a cult or anybody coming out of a cult?
Well, the message that I teach, I really focus on children. And the reason I focus on children is because I was young when it happened to me, and I saw so much going on with kids. Yes, it affects adults too, but adults make choices. Children don't.
Yes.
And I tell everyone, if you get attracted to a group or you feel like you want to join a group, one of the biggest telltale signs is to look at how they treat the children. If you look at how they treat the kids, if they treat the kids like slaves, if they treat the kids with disrespect, if they're beating the kids, if they're holding back food from the kids because as punishments, if they're treating their kids terribly, then stay away from it, because you can bet your bottom dollar it might not be a cult, but it's definitely not good.
Yeah.
Right.
It's about kids. Someone once told me that a dog can tell if a person is a good person or not a good person.
Right.
Well, so can a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can tell by the way people treat kids. So if you're asking me whether you're in a cult or whether you're not in a cult, I look at the hierarchy, I look at how it's set up and everything. I say, yes, it's structured like a cult, but are they abusing the children?
Yeah.
How are they treating the children? Are they forcing you to believe things that aren't true? Are they telling, the brainwashing aspect of a child, the psychological abuse? That is usually a big telltale sign of something that's wrong.
Yeah.
And then stay away from it, but also report it.
Yes.
And most of the leaders of today's cults, Nexium and La Luz del Mundo, and I can't think of all of them, are doing time for either human trafficking or rape or sexual abuse of a minor. There's a lot of them doing time. So
absolutely, and the rules, like this is something we were talking about earlier, was the rules, and we have to have more time together.
Yes,
you're coming back.
But one of the things that they do too is like treating kids like when you're abused. When a child was abused on our farm, they didn't deal with it. They simply just moved people from one farm to another and separated.
Right. Well,
and nobody got charged.
Yep.
Nobody was charged with anything. Nobody did any time for anything.
Richard, the Catholic Church did that for 50 years. So,
if not longer.
Yeah.
I agree. And so it's not just these cults that do that, but these cults are very known for doing that. They're very, very and secretive. Everything is secretive. You're not allowed to talk to anybody, tell anybody anything. And like me now, I wrote my book and told my story. My whole entire family, I never got along with most of them anyways, but now they won't even talk to me, period, because I told the story.
Oh.
And yet People Magazine needed someone to verify my story, so they contacted my oldest sister. And they verified everything with her to see if it was the truth or not before they would publish and put it on Discovery ID. And yet they cut me off. So it is what it is. And that happens in a lot of cases too. There's so many people I talk to that as soon as they tell their story, it's their immediate family just cuts them off. They don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
That's a shame. That's really a shame. All right, Richard, listen, we have to wrap it up, but please, we'll stay in touch. We're going to get your social media information. Melody and I will, and is he are you in one of our groups, podcasts?
He's in the Cultimatum group. Yeah.
Great.
And I'm in yours as well, Melody.
Oh, great. Escape and Recovery. Okay.
And my book is my book is also available in. You can read it online.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
You don't have to actually physically buy the book.
We'll put all that in the show. I would like to read it. So yeah.
I think you should read it and then contact me back and let's get back together and do another.
Absolutely.
I've still got 11 more interviews that I have scheduled to do. And then I have to kind of package the whole thing. And then, so it's going to be another couple of months, but it will come out. That one is called Silent Voices. And when you launch your podcast, please let us know. Absolutely. Yes, and in the meantime, Swindled by Faith, that's the book that's out there. And I've had so many people contact me and say, thanks for writing this book, because they all felt alone. Like so many people that thought they went through it themselves and nobody else. And that's why we're doing this podcast. It may not reach the number of people your book reaches, but we're hoping that one day we will reach enough people that they will get the message and hope. And maybe somebody, if we help one person in the next month to get out or
not join,
heal
or
help with their trauma.
Yes. Fantastic. Yes, I agree.
All right. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
It was nice to meet you
so
guys.
much.
Yeah.
Yes, you too.
And we will talk soon.
For sure.
Okay.
Yep. Bye-bye. Andrew, we want to thank Richard so much for coming on the show, for sharing his story, and for sharing about his book and his whole experience and how that affected him even to this day. And it's a great thing to have people of all generations coming on the show, sharing, and the authors. I love having the authors come on and share about their books, because I know that coming on and sharing their stories is part of their healing process. And I love being part of that.
I too like having authors come on, and which is telling me that people who are getting out of these cults, who write books, is just another way to get the word out there. So like our podcast, we're doing what we can. HBO and all the other networks are doing their documentaries, but these first person stories, if they publish these books, we had somebody last night that we encouraged. I think she started to write a memoir, and anyway, we hope that she follows through with that. So
for sure.
Authors are great because once that book is published, it's in stone, and it's something that not only will help other cult survivors, but gets the word out there that Melody,
absolutely,
it's not going to happen. But before I leave this earth, I'd like this world to be cult free. It's not going to happen.
No, but, me too. I'll share that dream with you.
But we're heading, I think, in that direction. So
yes, for sure. And mentioning documentaries, I can't remember if we mentioned it exactly on the episode, but Richard's story is part of a Discovery ID documentary that is, it was, I think, just one episode of a series, the Discovery ID People Magazine Investigates Cults, I believe he said. And I'm not sure exactly what episode it was, but it's in there, one of the episodes he was on there. So thanks again, Richard, so much for coming on the show and sharing your story with us and posting on our Facebook page as well. And we also want to thank all of you for tuning into Cultimatum. Your support is greatly appreciated, and please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on platforms such as Apple and Spotify. And don't forget to follow, share, and keep listening to all of our latest episodes.
You can also show your support by joining our Facebook group under the name Cultimatum Podcast.
And you can now find us on social media platforms, including Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok, and YouTube.
If you have a cult or human trafficking experience you'd like to share with us, please feel free to contact us at cultimatumpodcast@gmail.com.
Ex-cult members looking for any additional support can consider joining the Cult Escape and Recovery group on Facebook.
And if you're interested in hearing more from me, you can find me on my other podcast, Anonymous Andrew, Life and the Choices We Make.
Stay safe, stay informed, and remember, you're not alone.